So I'd like to share with you just a little about Promoting Enduring Peace and invite you to become a member. PEP was founded in the 1950s by Yale Professor of Divinity Jerome Davis, a true revolutionary. And I paraphrase Che Guevara, a true revolutionary, whether by political, social, or environmental arenas, is motivated by great feelings of love. Yes, that's Che Guevara. Jerome was this kind of revolutionary in the sense that he loved humanity and its capacity for compassionate behavior more than his own safety and comfort. He was a hero to our dad, Howard Frazier, in his visionary ideals and in his risk-taking for the higher good of human beings. We were taught early about what we, the people, means, and that power can come from sharing it with other people in a common voice and unified work for fairness and justice. PEP, in my mind, has always been associated with citizen diplomacy, with that rare and wonderful ability to listen to the other side of things, putting a human face on the so-called enemy, recognizing differences in approach and thinking as part of the expression of the human family. We've invited Christina Nichol, granddaughter to Howard Frazier, to offer her perspective as a 12-year-old traveler on a Volga Peace Cruise in the 1980s. Has anybody here been on a Volga Peace Cruise? Oh, yes, okay. So, Christina is a writer who has recently written an award-winning novel called Waiting for the Electricity. I highly recommend it, Waiting for the Electricity. It's about perspectives of life in Georgia in the former USSR. And she is presently writer in residence at Bucknell University in Pennsylvania. Christina.
Thank you. In the 1980s, when I was a kid, I was only allowed to watch 1 hour of TV a week. My brother and I would sneak in some other shows when my parents weren't watching or weren't home, but mostly we grew up on Monday night Little House on the Prairie. Sometimes Pa and a few of his friends would down shots of amber liquid, which usually put Pa in a good mood. Taking Pa's cue, when my brother and I would come home from school, we would surreptitiously drink teaspoons of what we assumed Pa was drinking, apple cider vinegar. This is just to say that I didn't exactly have a wide, encompassing view of the world at that time. Without TV, I spent most of my time roaming in the forest, chasing deer around. One day, under some ferns in a redwood grove behind our house, I found a pair of Russian binoculars. That was the day I found out, for the first time, that my country was in a Cold War with the Soviet Union. More astonished than really alarmed, my parents had all sorts of theories about these binoculars. The most credible one was that the KGB was spying on my grandfather. He already had a CIA file because he directed an organization promoting enduring peace, which brought 150 Americans to the Soviet Union every summer throughout the decade of the 80s. These Americans would join about 80 Russians on a cruise ship called the Alexander Pushkin. These Volga Peace Cruises, as they were called, would wind up the Volga River, promoting people-to-people diplomacy. A short while after my discovery of the Soviet binoculars, I was on my first peace cruise, accompanied by my mom. The peace boat chugged up the river for 10 days, from Rostov-on-Don to Kazan, passing fishermen and picnicking families, and stopping at the riverside towns of Volgograd and Ulyansk, where we were greeted by women dressed in colorful folk outfits, offering us loaves of golden bread and bowls of salt. The Soviet government seemed to have handpicked the Russians we traveled with. They represented the creme de la creme of the Soviet establishment. Communist officials, cosmonauts, chess champions, poets, members of a rock band, and a ballet dancer who made it her project to get everyone to take part in the chicken dance together. The Americans, on the other hand, were a self-selected bunch, mostly peace advocates, and a Mark Twain impersonator. My grandfather was a Southern gentleman from Tennessee who loved peaches and honeycomb. He'd met my step-grandmother at a yoga camp where she'd taught him to stand on his head. His signature expression was to ask people, "How are you anyhow?" and to answer the same question with mighty fine indeed. Whenever he met someone, instead of saying, "Nice to meet you," he would say, "So good to see you," as if he'd always known that person and was happy to see him again. When some of the Americans would complain to him about the lower standards of comfort on the ship, for example, if they said, "I can't sleep because my room is next to the ship's engine," he would say simply, "Well, I think it would be a mighty fine idea if you changed your room then." He read a page of the Bible every day, and yet always looked like he'd just fed his sweet tooth on peanut brittle when his wife wasn't watching. The Soviets adored him. Every day we participated in peace workshops on the top deck of the boat, or would stop at a town where the whole population of the port city would congregate. We would visit war memorials, mass grave sites, and eternal flames commemorating those lost in World War II. I remember thinking it ironic that during the peace rallies, some of the Americans would shove each other aside, competing over who could wave their signs the highest in order to land the front page of Pravda, the Soviet newspaper. I once heard my grandmother asking my grandfather, "Howard, do you think we're doing these peace trips because of our egos?" And my grandfather answered, "I hope not. I hope not." The friendly way the Soviets treated us was not different from how they were treated in the US. In 1986, Promoting Enduring Peace brought 46 Soviets, including cosmonaut Gregory Grechko, to the US for a peace cruise with 130 Americans, this time on the Mississippi River on a ship called the Delta Queen. When they stopped at the riverside towns, the Chamber of Commerce's welcoming committee greeted them along with 100 of Americans, mostly farmers, and a Tom Sawyer impersonator handing out bouquets of carnations. As the ship would leave, up to 300 people from the shore would wave goodbye, yelling to come back and see them. One newspaper reported about the event. One guy kept trying to get his dog to wave. A fairly hilarious account of one of the cruises on the Volga River in Russia is described in the book Republican Party Reptile, The Convention's Adventures and Other Outrages of Peter O'Rourke. He writes about the participants. They were lefties, all right. In between palsies of fretting, they'd tell you how wonderful the Soviet Union was. Pensions were huge, housing was cheap, and they practically paid you to get medical care. Believe me, you haven't been bored until you've been buttonholed by a woman who holds forth all afternoon on the perfidy of American foreign policy and shows you pictures of her grandchildren. These were people who believed everything about the Soviet Union was great, but they were bringing their own toilet paper. Either beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, or I suppose as a 12-year-old, I hadn't yet developed Mr. O'Rourke's level of cynicism. In a box in my mom's garage, I recently found an old journal I had brought with me on that trip to the Soviet Union. It's mostly filled with pages of Russian addresses, people I had met along the Volga River who had greeted us, begging me to write back to them or forward letters to Pink Floyd for them. Sometimes taking off an amber bracelet or necklace they were wearing and shoving it into my palm. They would run after the boat, yelling, "Bye-bye, please write to me." In Moscow, we attended more peace talks, this time sitting around tables with green glass bottles of salty mineral water officially placed in front of us. At dinner in the In-Tourist Hotel's restaurant, we were served square omelets. I'd never seen anything so uniformly yellow. For dessert, a scoop of salty, ludicrously rich ice cream with currant jam dripping down the sides. To this day, I associate communism with the taste of salty, rich ice cream and currant jam, the color with the olive green of the suits the communist officials wore, and the smell with old carpet mixed with humidity and the pheromones of social experiment. Inside the meeting halls for peace, I believed I had caught a glimpse of the true adult world, where people like my grandfather met and made wise decisions about how to create a future where we all live together in peace. This was the middle of the 80s. Reagan had just been elected, much to my grandfather's consternation, and the overarching sense was that the only thing that mattered anymore was peace, because the world was on the brink of destruction, or in the words of the poet Anna Akhmatova, "The wings of black death have flown over us. All grief has turned to drunkenness. Why then do we feel so radiant?" All the old laws of self-interest that had ruled humanity for centuries no longer held any traction because we were on the brink of destruction. The stakes were too high to undertake anything but the most extreme and unprecedented kind of new law, the law of peace. In that meeting hall were adults and an American Mark Twain impersonator, and yes, I guess Peter O'Rourke too, exchanging literary anecdotes with the Soviet poets. And in this life or death situation, I believed they would make the right choice, that humanity would pull through. Promoting enduring peace and its emphasis on people-to-people diplomacy provided for me a template for a new and a different way to be a grown-up, which I see our recipients today are. Thank you.